Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the All Saints podcast. I'm here with Jonatas Cunha from Brazil, and I'd like us to get to know him a little bit, hear about his ministry in the past, hear about the church in Brazil, and hear about what may, Lord willing, lie in store for him and his family in the future. Jonatas, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me here. It's a privilege to be here and just have the opportunity to speak a little bit of ministry in Brazil and the reality of the churches here, and also to talk to the people of All Saints, and also other people who might hear this podcast.
Great. Well, I should explain how we got in touch. So you were put in touch with us by a mutual friend, Joost Nixon, who has for a number of years worked for TLI, Training Leaders International. He and I have known each other for a while. We've supported TLI. We've supported Munir Alaji, who works for part of TLI, doing theological training for Arabic-speaking Christians in the Levant and around the Mediterranean, in Turkey and elsewhere in Europe. So we've had this connection with Joost, and Joost just connected Jonatas and me, and we had a Zoom call a week or two ago, and I thought, I would love to hear a little bit from you. I'd love for the people at All Saints and elsewhere to hear a bit from you about the church in Brazil. But before we jump into that, just tell us about your family. You're married. You have some children, I understand.
Yes, I'm married. We've been married since 2018, and we now have 3 kids. The first one is 4, the second is 2 years old, and then the third one is 15 days now. So
15 days, that's right. I remember because last time we talked, your third was had an age measured in hours, if I recall.
Yeah.
Well, your wife is bearing children for you at a fair old clip. The Lord be praised for that. That's great. All right, so look, tell us a little bit about, so get some background first. The church in Brazil, I mean, here in America, it's possible for us to think, well, there's America and then there's everywhere else. And we think of all these countries, and we think of Brazil, and we think of places in South America, and we fail to realize quite how vast Brazil is. And of course, there's a fair texture of Christian traditions and backgrounds there, as well as a bunch of other religious backgrounds. So can you give us a sketch of the religious landscape of Brazil, and then the church landscape, and where you fit into that sort of theologically and geographically?
Yeah. So, Brazil used to be very, very much Catholic. So it was, like in the beginning, it was pretty much just Catholic. At least the majority of the people were Catholic. And an interesting story is that John Calvin, he sent missionaries to Brazil in the past, and then there's stories of Reformed people who came here in the beginning of right when Brazil was discovered, and then some of them were killed by the Catholics who were here because they professed their faith. There's even a confession of faith made by them that they had to tell people what they believed, and then some of them were killed because of their faith. It was different from the Roman Catholic Church. So
Wow.
it was so for many years Brazil was just Catholic, and then of course Protestants start coming here, and then the Presbyterian Church starts with a man called Simonton. He was from the Presbyterian Church, and then he came here and started the church, and then a couple of missionaries came as well. And actually, Simonton, he in just a few years that he was here, he died, but then his work just multiplied and was just fruitful through him and others. But when we read the stories of people in the beginning, there's many missionaries who had who went to places in Brazil and they had problems with the majority of Catholics. Some of them were persecuted, some of them were killed, and so that's how it started. But then now, I would say that we're we're the majority. If we talk about Protestant churches in
Oh, wow.
general, I think it's the majority, or at least it's very close. It's no longer the Catholic Church is no longer a majority. Like, let's say 99%. I don't have the statistics right now, but if I had to guess, I would say at least 50-50 or something like that.
Wow.
But then, of course, when we look at that Protestant faith, I would say Reformed, it's just a little piece of that, and
Right.
because most of them would be Pentecostal or prosperity gospel, which is everywhere, but in Brazil too is advancing like in a way that's just terrible. And then
Hmm.
so and then so within the Reformed churches, so
Yes.
you would have some independent churches, I guess, and then the Presbyterian Church, and then of course now the CREC is here, so that's great, and also maybe a little some Baptist Reformed churches here and there, and then so here's the thing.
Hmm.
I can talk about the Presbyterian Church, right? So I'm a minister here in the Presbyterian Church, and our constitution, and we affirm the Westminster Confession of Faith, and we're we try to follow that. But I would say that one of the struggles, and the Presbyterian Church of Brazil right now, is that a lot of churches, they and pastors, they promise to follow the confession, but in practice they don't.
Okay.
So there's no uniformity in terms of following the confession. So you could, I think generally you would say that the Presbyterian Church would be similar, but I you could enter a Presbyterian church here and you would question yourself, am I in the Assembly of God? Because
Right.
they're just not following the documents. So
Right. So what's behind that? I mean, is that pressure from kind of broader social movements outside the church, or is it a feeling of these Pentecostal or charismatic churches are growing, they're much bigger, we need to become like them in order to attract people? What's behind that?
yeah, well, at least in my understanding, perhaps other people would have a different view of history, but my understanding is that, so for example, my father was in seminary here, but at the time that my father was in seminary in the Presbyterian Church, they had, like, let's say, 2 books available in Portuguese with
Okay.
and with they had Berkhoff in Spanish and the institutes in Spanish, maybe. So, and then, so a lot of those pastors, they they knew the confession, they knew, but I think they knew broadly what Reformed would mean. So a lot of them. So that's the way we talk here. For example, we say about Presbyterian churches that are just traditional, and Presbyterian churches that are confessional. And what's the difference?
Right.
The traditional would be the church that it's just so they knew a kind of tradition of how Presbyterians were, but they
Hmm.
don't really know, like, what's the what really is the confession and what's to follow, and so of course some of them know, and they know parts, but just the lens that they use is the tradition and not the confession.
Right.
And
And
then
so it sounds like, sorry, go on. Yeah.
the other side is the confessional, and that's my understanding of history is that a lot of people started going to the U.S. to study, and with of course with the internet and all the documents, and tons of publishers now here translating books and publishing good books. So there's a new rise of people that know about the confession and how it's to be confessional, and so you can see how that inside the denomination creates a tension, and then so I would say when you have a church that's just traditional, that you would have the pastors that are traditional. They will say, no, I reject that. I reject no Pentecostalism. I reject prosperity gospel because I
Right.
don't see that in the Bible. So you would have the faithful ones, but when you have a more evangelical, let's say a broad view and just tradition, sometimes that's not enough to
Right.
resist the pressure of a new promise, a new thing that look at this Pentecostal church, how many people were going there, so why don't we do the same? So if you're
Right.
not grounded in a confession or in something solid, you just you give in to
Right.
that.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And that was going to be my question to you. Pardon me interrupting you a moment or two ago. The thought that the lack of theological resources can cause that kind of problem. I was going to say, well, aren't there more theological resources available? And yeah, but I can very much see the landscape you're describing, where if people haven't had that, you don't have much to fight with, so to speak. You haven't got the tools for the job.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, it's interesting. And you talked about your father going to seminary. So was he a pastor, or is he a pastor?
Yes, he's a pastor. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, and tell us about. I mean, this is off the topic of Brazil now, but tell us about yourself and growing up and his influence on you. So you grew up as a pastor's kid.
Yes,
Can
I
you
did.
tell us a bit about your own upbringing?
Yes. So yeah, I grew up as a pastor's kid, and it was we did had some challenges of but today as I think about it, it's just every professional, every job or profession that one has will bring with it some challenges and things. So um but when I look back, I'm very thankful for there's nothing that I complain about. Just I think my father did a good job of loving the church, but also loving us. So just he did a good
Right,
job of we knew how much he was dedicating, how much he was giving himself for the church, but we had no question that he would stop everything to to help us, and he actually did that a couple of times. For example, my sister, she wanted to study, and the place we were in at that time, there was no university, and she got a good scholarship to go somewhere else. And then my father was like, well, I can't leave her in that season. So
hmm
he got a call in another place close to her to be close to her. So he was very committed to the ministry, but we just had no question that he would put the family. He wouldn't sacrifice the family to the point of harming the family for the ministry. So it
Interesting.
was good, and then of course it was good growing up in a Presbyterian church. You know, hearing good preaching, good teaching. Um, so Yeah, that was
Right,
good.
right. It's interesting your comment about every calling, every vocation having its struggles, because I think one of the things I've noticed over the years with pastors is there's an increasing awareness of the, so to speak, struggles of pastoral ministry. And I think
Mm.
sometimes that can actually become slightly myopic and self-serving. So I kind of want to
Yeah,
say, look, have you talked to the guys in your congregation, and men and women who have all kinds of different vocations? Like, they have struggles too, and I do think there are unique and distinct
mm.
challenges of being a pastor. I mean, it'd be foolish to deny that, but there are unique and distinct, though different, challenges to being a business owner, or being an employee in a 9-to-5 job, or being a mum, or being retired. All these things, they have a particular texture to them, and the best shepherds don't spend all their time talking about other shepherds. They
Yeah,
talk about the sheep, and I've occasionally found myself worrying that sometimes we pastors can get a little bit too wrapped up in the distinctive struggles of our own calling, rather than thinking,
yes,
look,
yes,
we're just in the same. We do have a distinct role, and there are some distinct pressures, but come on, get out there and
yeah.
recognize that so did everybody else.
I know. Yeah, I totally agree with that,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
agree
interesting.
that you can get so it's as if we had a special category, right, of
Right, right,
struggles,
right.
and then
Well,
but
and
the yeah,
it is strange. I mean, I guess, just to put some specificity in it, it is a peculiar position, to be in a sense. I don't know how you parse it exactly. Maybe put it like this: people's relationship with their pastor is very much more closely related to their relationship with Christ and their relationship with the church than their relationship with their other friends and family members. Maybe that's one way of putting it. And so
yeah,
the kind of interlocking character of those relationships can sometimes, it generates interesting effects in relationships that I've
yeah,
noticed, and um, uh, I've often wished I could spend more time with. In fact, I've almost always found myself wishing I could spend more time with people in the congregation,
mm.
and rarely am able to spend the time with almost anybody that I'd like to. And I don't know whether that's something that other people feel in the same way, but I'm very sure they feel other things similarly. I think probably people in growing churches, members of congregations in growing churches, might feel relational strains and relational challenges that the pastor doesn't feel. The pastor gets to know everybody because, at least to some degree, we're welcoming people into membership. Whereas people who are members of the church, perhaps have been members for many years, they don't necessarily get to know all the new people, and so they're
Yeah,
just having a different experience of their relational landscape. I don't think it necessarily makes it harder or easier. It's just different.
yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, we
And
shouldn't
there's
just
some
talk about
things.
us.
Yeah,
No, sorry, God.
yeah, and there's some things that is just it's just a part of it's part of having a job. And so, for example,
Right.
we talk about pastors and the struggle of managing time for family and work,
Hmm.
right? But that's talk about the doctor who's just like having to be in the hospital for many hours, and there's people calling him and sending messages to ask things, because the pediatrician, because the kid is, the moms are just texting the pediatrician every time. So the doctor, he also had to he also has to manage that at
Yeah.
even as the pastor.
One
So
hundred percent. 100%. Whenever I think that um, the demands of pastoral ministry are kind of all consuming, you never stop being a pastor. Well, yes. In a sense, there's no such thing as a day off from the kind of emergency crises, but there are many callings like that. If you're running your own business, you're running a web-based business, and the site goes down, good luck on your day off, right? Because I think of a slightly different sort of calling. We have a number of medical professionals in the church here, and You know that they work nights, they work long shifts. Sometimes they'll be working 24 hours straight, and they'll sleep in the hospital if they can, but they might not be able to. We have medical professionals who sometimes come to Bible study or come to church even in their medical, in their scrubs, or I don't know what the technical term is for those, the hospital clothes that people wear. But that's a reminder of the fact that work and life and taking seriously any calling requires you to give yourself to it pretty committedly and pretty wholeheartedly.
But that's
so we have
I think it's where we as pastors, we are reflecting something of our culture, right? That's just introspective. So, and then we're becoming introspective in our profession. And then I always remember a phrase I read, I think, I can't remember exactly if it was J.I. Packer, but he said something about, it's good to look inside of us and have some kind of introspection, but we can't do it to a point of become something morbid. Just
right. Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally right. I think it was, I was listening to some talks years ago by Dr. Robert Rayburn, pastor in the PCA up in the Pacific Northwest at the time. I think he's retired now, but he gave these lectures at Covenant Seminary, if I remember, and they are absolutely mind-blowing. They're very, very hard-hitting, and one of the things he talked about was just work ethic among pastors. And he quoted from Alexander White, the great Scottish Presbyterian from 100 and something years ago, who said, I think I remember the quote, he said, "I would have all lazy ministers drummed out of the presbytery. I would have laziness held to be the one unpardonable sin in all our ministers." And he goes on this long quotation. It's it really hits you, because you realize we do have freedoms to use our time in ways that other men and women don't, and it brings temptations. And Lord help us if we, who ought to be setting an example of hard work, ever succumb to that kind of attitude. So, hey, tell us a bit more about your current pastoral situation. You've been in pastoral ministry now, if I remember rightly, for 2 or 3 years. You went to Covenant Seminary, is that right? You have an MDiv from Covenant, is that right? Or Reformed Seminary?
Yes, I went to Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right. And that's where you met Joost.
That's where I met Joost. Yeah, he went there with TLI to recruit people.
Got it.
So that's how we...
Did he really?
Yeah.
Joost, you're rumbled now, my friend. Now we know what you're doing.
So that's how we got connected.
So you have a MDiv in Theology and Pastoral Studies from Reformed in Jackson. When did you graduate?
When?
Yeah.
Yes, I was 2020. Okay.
So you come into pastoral ministry, and if I remember, you've had 2 pastoral positions, and the current one you're in is coming to an end. But before we look to the future, it'd be just great to hear where the Lord has led you so far in terms of your ministry and where you've been serving. Tell us a bit about those churches.
Yes. So I was ordained in the end of 2020, and then I was sent to plant a church in a city called Goiás, also in the state of Goiás. It used to be the capital many years ago, and we were there for 2 years, and then we saw some fruits. It was good to, when we arrived there, they had like 3 people.
Oh wow!
And then they didn't have. So the only thing they had was just a prayer meeting or something like that. So we did see some fruits, so in 2 years, so that was good, encouraging to know that the Lord was using us despite our even inexperience, lack of experience, because it was my first call. But then, so we started having, so as I went there, I started to look for sources, and I really enjoyed. There's some podcasts and little articles by John Payne, I think is his name,
Right.
and he writes about a means of grace church planting, something like that. It's
Hmm.
just like you will plant the church, and this the strategy will be worship. You're going to give the people the means of grace. So that's what we tried to do, and it was encouraging to see people coming. Of course, when we left, it wasn't like 200 people, but at least we had in our worship service we had between 10 to 20 people,
Oh,
and
wow, that's great.
people people came very interested in the Reformed faith and interested in learning about the Reformed faith. So that was good. And then so one and then but we got to a point as a family that we thought we needed to go somewhere else, and especially one of the reasons was that we wanted to be closer to my parents. My mom had some health issues in the past, and they were here by themselves, so we were praying and for a place to go. And then uh, one of the reasons also was that, so that's why we came to this place that's close to our parents, to my parents, so that we could be close to them, have their help, but also to assist them as they needed and if any health issue came up. So thankfully not many things happened with them,
Right.
but one thing did happen. I did have to go there one time to stay with my mom a little bit in the hospital because she had a surgery. Uh so but then so we are here. We came here last year, and we'll be here till the end of the year. And so I'm in the north of Brazil, in a state called Rondônia, or Rondônia, uh, in a city called Jaru.
Mhm.
And so I'm the assistant pastor here, helping with the with the with the church, and also with some small congregations that we have in the rural area. Uh, and then we're no longer going to stay here because the session has decided that we need to leave. Uh,
Right.
and because what we were seeing, and I was seeing that myself as well, is that we
Mm.
were going in different directions in terms of visions of theological visions, and then uh, uh, you know ministry, how we see ministry. So the session saw that, and I also saw that, and and well, I think it would be great if we could let me see how to say that. But it would be great. It would be great if there was a point of connection to
Yeah.
change things. But we got to a point that we're both committed to what we believe. So
Understood.
the session decided that, and so the difference are, so I would say, so that's my point of view, of course. But the church goes more to a faithful view of traditional Presbyterianism,
Hmm.
and I have a view more of a confessional, you know, full subscription, or something like that, and to
Right. Okay.
view of church. So just one example, I guess the thing was narrowed down to this. Yeah, we talked about that, Steve, in the past. One of the things was that the church here, they have children's church, right?
Hmm.
And one of my convictions is that the children should stay as part of the covenant body. They should stay in the worship service. Um, so that was one of the differences we had, and that they thought wasn't compatible.
Right. Right.
So just I think that's the how broadly, and
Yeah.
and it's I think the best I can do, also being ethical with someone who's not here to talk about
Yeah.
their view, right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because what you say prompts a couple of thoughts. I mean, the first thought, and this is going back a step or two, just to your comments about how you sought to go about church planting. That's a really principled and faithful way, I think, to approach church planting, and especially in a context where there are all the temptations to the culturally attractive quick fixes, right?
Mhm.
To say, no, we're going to establish a reformed church, we're going to worship God, we're going to teach the scriptures. It's actually much, much, much harder to do that than to put on a sound and light show, because the truth is, and again, this is something about in which I do have some experience, because we have a missionary whom we support, a good friend of mine, Kip Chelishaw, in Nairobi, Kenya, and he runs into something which seems analogous, where there are many, many churches around which have thousands of members that are basically prosperity gospel churches with a kind of Pentecostal flavor. And it is very, very easy to get people to the point where, out of a sense of desperation, they will give money to keep those ministries afloat and make them look successful. It is much, much harder to teach people deep, biblical, reformed, faithful convictions. It's just a different kind of activity you're doing, and it's not just. I mean, one way of parsing it is, if you were into marketing and you didn't care about the message, you'd launch a Pentecostal prosperity gospel church in a poor part of the world and prey on people's psychological vulnerability. That's exactly what a lot of people do, and it's exactly what we're not interested in doing. And what it means is, I mean, you described a church going from 3 people to 20 people. Well, honestly, brother, that looks like a multiplication of about 7-fold to me, and that looks great, And I want to encourage you, and you don't need me to say this, but because it's your convictions that are driving this. But I think it's to if you start off down a road of compromising for the sake of numbers, there's no way off that road. And similar thoughts strike me actually about your description of the situation that you're in now. I think it's a very gracious way of framing it, to say, these are brothers in Christ, and we just have a different vision of pastoral ministry. And a maxim that I have had cause to remember as I've looked at some of my friends and going back a long way, some other experiences I've had, is that an assistant pastor cannot change a church, but an assistant pastor could split a church if he insisted on his own way, against the convictions of his session or the senior pastor. And so the best thing for an assistant pastor to do in a situation like that is to just hold his hands up and say, listen, brothers, I think I see things differently, and I'm content to leave. And to do that for the sake of the gospel, wishing each other well, and then you're able, especially at your stage of your ministry, you're just a few years in, you don't want to start off down the wrong road and then spend the next 30 years trying to change course,
Yeah.
So it isn't easy. It makes me think of your wife, particularly, mother of 3, including one who's 2 and a bit weeks old, and contemplating more uncertainty. But our wives sign up for a lot when they marry us, don't they? And then we rely on them to be there with us and serving our families, and then we seek to find the best way to serve the Lord, and who knows what the future holds, right?
Yeah. So, and of course, it's challenging, as you said, but it's one of the verses that has helped me. It's Proverbs, when it says that there is wisdom in the multitude of counsels. So that's something I've tried to do in every new step here. So that I could, because I don't have a lot of experience in ministry. So, but it's been, I can say that we've been very, very comforted and very, very encouraged by God in just knowing that we're following the right steps. So that's I think that's the best part. It is, when we think it's about the other possibility of maybe doing things our way, and I think it'd be much worse. So I don't regret anything. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, it raises the question, and this is by no means the reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast here, but I can tell you from the point of view of the CREC here, and as you know, and as anybody who hasn't met me can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the US. I'm from England, moved over here a number of years ago. But one of the things that we're seeing in the CREC is a quite substantial growth in the number of churches that were in our denomination, either new churches being planted. We ourselves planted a church just down the road a few months ago in Granbury, Texas, or existing churches joining us. And both of those things are happening both in the US and overseas. It's happening a little bit in Brazil. And so one of the encouraging things I found about talking to you, Jonatas, is here's a guy whose convictions seem pretty close to ours here in the CREC, who's looking for a context in which to serve. And at the moment, here we are in May now, and you'll be in your present position until the end of the year. No future has yet opened up, and you're just trusting the Lord to open those doors. And so it's not my job to be an ecclesiastical matchmaker, but who knows what may come of this. If you're watching this video sometime in 2024 or even early 2025, and you want me to put you in touch with Jonatas Cunha, please don't hesitate. allsaintskirk.com and contact me, Steve Jeffery, through the website. But maybe it would be just helpful, just with our last few minutes together. Do you want to just talk about your own theological journey, your own theological convictions? Because you went to Reformed Theological Seminary, great seminary in many, many ways. And yet the kind of convictions that you've talked about expressing, having children in worship and one or two other things that I know you've said to me, they're not the kind of center of gravity of that seminary. And so maybe you're a little bit of a loner in relation to your peers, your contemporaries, but maybe you wouldn't be a loner in relation to the CREC. So just talk to us about the things that have influenced you and how in the last few years your theological perspective has changed.
Yes. So before I went to seminary, I grew up I was shaped by the traditional Presbyterianism. So I didn't know about the confession and just like details and everything. So but I was interested in the Reformed faith, at least as I knew it, in just websites and things that were just appearing at that time. So when I went to RTS, one of the things that they really prize there to teach in a lot of classes was knowing the confession. So I can remember just reading the Westminster Confession and the catechism and thinking, why didn't I knew that before? Why didn't I know that before? Why didn't I study that before? Or it's just so much rich information. So in seminary, I started learning what Presbyterianism was by the definition of Presbyterians and not by the definition of tradition, and then that really was something that captured my attention and my heart. I just started studying that and trying to understand. So how is that about ministry? How what's the role of the pastor? What's the role of the elders? What's the role? So that's questions and trying to understand the confession. So that what seminary did to me, right? But then after I left seminary, I came to Brazil and started ministry here. And then I read a book while I was in the church planting. I read a book by a pastor here in Brazil that's about Christian worldview. And he really, his name is Eber Campos Jr. And that book really called my attention to the Lordship of Christ. and in a
Right.
way that I hadn't thought before. So how that applies to every area of life, which then was a little bit different, the perspective of what I had in seminary, right? About
Right. Gotcha.
how broad is the application of the Lordship of Christ. And then that called my attention, and I said, I need to study that. I need to understand what is this. And then I read a book by Vaughan Poitras. It's
Right.
the Lordship of Christ, I think.
That'd do it.
Sorry?
I said that'd do it. That'd do the trick.
And then,
Reading Vern Poitras, great guy.
yeah. So I read that book, and then I can't remember the name in English of the book by Doug Wilson, The Paradise Displaced, something like that.
Now you're testing me on my knowledge of Doug Wilson's published works, all 87 of them. I can't remember. Oh, no, hold on. Heaven Misplaced. Heaven Misplaced.
Yes.
Is one on worship. That's it. Yeah, got it. How about that? That's great.
Yeah. So it's an introduction to postmillennialism, and so that called my attention too. And so I even talked that with another friend that we had, another Brazilian that we were in seminary together. We talked about that. It seemed like we had this great theology, but it was just on the clouds the whole time. It wasn't touching lives. It wasn't touching like real life, which is how does that apply to, how I get this Lordship of Christ, and how does that, what's the implications of that for politics, so why can't I speak? Why can't I bring the application to that point, or to So that's how I started, and then I started reading more about postmillennialism and a couple of books. And then I went to the exegesis of problems of that, just trying to understand,
Right.
Matthew 24, and then and Revelation. So I guess that's a little bit of the journey, how I got here.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating because people take different journeys, but one of the steps that strikes me is the step to eschatology. I sometimes think of eschatology, and I teach it this way, as it's a theology of everything, because it's a theology of history. And so if you get your eschatology right, which is to say, get it biblical, and post-mill eschatology, in my view, is biblical, some form of post-mill eschatology. I know there's some debates among us, but what that does is it grounds the statements of the Lordship of Christ over different areas of life, kind of Kuyperian stance on those issues. It grounds them in actual history and gives us expectations of our future. And what it also does is it connects them to practical outworkings. So, for example, it's all very well saying, yeah, God has made promises to our children. We have a view of Christ's lordship over our family life. But what eschatology does is specifically connect that to our expectations for future generations of our offspring, and it starts to condition us or teach us to raise our children with the expectation of their growth in faith over time and of their faithfulness in the future. And it's the window through which we can then view all these other doctrinal loci and slot them into place. You do the same then with worship. You do the same with a philosophy of education, and the sacraments, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's interesting just to hear your journey. Well, look, Jonatas, it has been a great blessing to get to know you. Give us just some final thoughts and prayer requests as we say goodbye to you, at least for now, and then we'll call our conversation to a close. Final thoughts and maybe some prayer requests.
All right. Well, once again, Steve, thank you for having me here in the podcast, and it was great to have this opportunity to share a little bit of ministry here in Brazil. To have this chance of letting people know who might hear that how's ministry here in Brazil. Perhaps God may even use that to bring some people here, right? To help with ministry here as well. So thank you so much, and I also, as a prayer request, it just wisdom for us as we decide the next step, that we would
Great.
choose well and a place to serve God, and just praying for our family. It's just our baby has 15 days, so anyone with a family with 3 little children and one has 15 days, no, we need prayer. So
Yeah, I think there are a good number of people who could sympathize with that. That's great.
so
All
yeah,
right,
thank you.
wonderful. Jonatas Cunha, thank you for joining us. And for everyone else listening, the Lord bless you. And bye for now.